We're starting this broadcast from the Russia-Ukraine war. President Vladimir Putin has emphasized that Russia will not rule out using its new hypersonic Oreshnik missile in a strike on Ukraine. During a press conference at the end of his two-day visit to Kazakhstan, Putin also reiterated that Moscow will allow response to Western weapons strikes on its territory. Putin said that the use of the Oreshnik against the military and military-industrial facilities and even decision-making centers in Kiev is not ruled out. The threat comes after it used the experimental weapon for the first time against the Ukrainian city of Dnipro. The missile has 6 warheads and flies at 10 times the speed of sound. The Russian leader also asserted that the weapon has the destructive power of a meteoroid and is comparable in strength to a nuclear strike when used several times at once.
I
said that if applied in a single strike using multiple systems at once, using 2, 3, 4 complexes, it would be comparable in force to the use of nuclear weapons. But it is not nuclear because it is A, highly accurate, and B, not equipped with a nuclear explosive device.
И Б не оснащено ядерным взрывным устройством.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has described Putin's comments as saber-rattling aimed at disrupting efforts to bring the war to an end. At a summit at Astana, Putin further recalled US's decision to allow long-range strikes in Russia. He said that this decision by the Biden administration could be aimed at creating obstacles for President-elect Trump to negotiate a peace deal. Putin hailed Trump as a clever and experienced leader, voicing confidence that he would be able to find a solution. Biden, meanwhile, put out a reminder of the urgency and importance of supporting Ukraine. A statement released by the White House says the United States stands with more than 50 countries in support of Ukraine and its fight for freedom. Biden referred to Russia's overnight aerial attack, in particular, describing it as outrageous. And this was Russia's second big attack on Ukraine's energy infrastructure this month, triggering deep power cuts across the country. Putin says this was in response to Ukraine's strikes on Russian territory with US ATACMS missiles. Beset by the continual Russian assault, Ukraine has signed off on massive military spending plans for next year. Kiev's 2025 budget plans will see more than $50 billion, or 60% of all expenditure, go towards defense and security. Outgunned, outmanned and outspent by Moscow, Kiev has been forced to ramp up defense spending to support the war effort as the conflict nears the 3-year mark. And to get us some perspective, we are now being joined by James Jackson, defense journalist and political analyst from Berlin. Mr. Jackson, thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast.
Thanks for having me.
Now, when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war, at least in the contemporary times, it seems like more is happening on the political front than actually on the battlefield, because there's a lot of anticipation as to what's to come in Washington in the next 1 month. That's in January. Donald Trump is going to take office. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely, although I wouldn't necessarily separate the military front from the political front, because it's quite obvious that this escalation by Vladimir Putin, as well as the escalation backed by the West with the ATACMS missiles being allowed to strike into Russia, don't take place in a political vacuum. That is, Biden, knowing that he's outgoing president, allows them to strike. Western allies like the UK followed suit, knowing that Donald Trump will be taking over and fearing that he will not allow the Ukrainians these kind of possibilities, and may even push for a peace deal that would be beneficial to Russia, because of course he is known for having and boasts of having good relationship with Vladimir Putin, rather than the sort of antagonistic stance that most Western leaders have. Trump thinks he can get Putin around the table, deal with him, do a deal like it's a New York construction site. But of course, international politics is very different, and Putin is a very tricky negotiator.
Right. Of course, we are privy to the push and pull that we are seeing in the United States between Joe Biden and the incoming President Donald Trump. I bet Ukraine as well is privy to the matter. So, as you rightly point out, that Joe Biden is doing everything he can till he has the power to do so. So, about 1 month we have of Washington providing the kind of weapons it is to Kiev. But that's 1 month of fighting. What is the strategy post Donald Trump?
Well, from the US perspective, I think it's clear that there wasn't enough strategy. And I would include the Europeans on that as well, because, you know, Putin boasted about outproducing munitions, outfiring, you know, having more money at this conference in Kazakhstan. And he's actually right, because the Russians have really transformed into a war footing on their economy. So they've ramped up industrial production, they've created new factories, whereas in Europe, it's so hard to get planning permission because you might have to, you know, move a few birds' nests. There's not really enough buy-in from Western leaders to bypass these kind of planning issues. We can question how committed Western allies are to this fight. Yes, they have given huge amounts of support in monetary terms, in terms of old weapons, now some newer weapons, but it's really unclear that they haven't quite taken the steps necessary to redefine their economies and their relationship with the military-industrial complex, with the defense industry, effectively. The defense industry could have been expanded here, and many analysts and politicians would argue it should have been expanded, because we're dealing with a defense industry that wasn't made for this kind of war. And no, Europe isn't involved in this war yet directly, but many people see it as a form of deterrence and wonder why that message hasn't got through to certainly the larger European capitals, and especially here in Berlin, where I'm joining you from today.
Right. You made a point earlier that the Russian President Vladimir Putin is a tough negotiator. Let me take that point a little further. We have been talking to a few political analysts from Moscow, and some of them are referring to Donald Trump as the peace president. Now, Donald Trump's peace plan and Joe Biden's peace plan are starkly different, aren't they?
Well, this word peace can be used in very different ways, can't it? So if Trump comes in and negotiates a ceasefire or a kind of deal which allows Moscow to keep all of the territory that it has, which is, of course, Crimea, but then Donetsk and most of Luhansk as well, or the other way around, rather, that would, in a sense, be peace. But would it be a just peace? Because Moscow has invaded a sovereign country, redrawn the map through the use of force, and that kind of gets away from what international law is supposed to prevent. So, you know, we're not supposed to live in a world where stronger countries can redraw boundaries and borders at will. So it might be a deal that stops the fighting, but it may also undermine the international order itself and lead to, you know, escalation of conflicts elsewhere, destruction of norms in the rules-based global order, as the US would put it, or, you know, international law, as we say in Europe. So there might be a temporary ceasefire if Trump comes in, but I wouldn't call it peace, and particularly with Russia, because Russia has shown that it's willing to invade sovereign countries to get what it wants. And they've done that before in Georgia as well. So who's to say they won't do it on another of their neighbors that tries to stand up with them, possibly even on the NATO eastern flank. And then we would be very far away from peace. We would be trapped in a destructive war.
All right, Mr. Jackson, I'll have to leave it with that. Thanks for talking to us. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.